Hello, everyone. This is the Wednesday, November 27th edition of Wednesday with Walton and Newberry. I'm Brian Walton with Blake Newberry here, and we're coming to you via video form at thecardinalnation.com and audio at the Scoops Sports Network and all your favorite podcast apps. What Blake and I have decided to do this week, we're about 15 or 16 picks into the Cardinal Nation Top 50 Prospect Countdown for 2025. We started with number 50. Every fifth article is free. So even if you're not a subscriber to the Cardinal Nation, you can see the depth of content that we provide about each one of these prospects, and hopefully you'll be curious about the others and want to subscribe. But we'll cover a little bit about some of the prospects who aren't in the free articles in our time here today. We start off at number 50 with Dakota Hudson, a middle infielder who reached Springfield, and you can read about him there at the Cardinal Nation, as I said. Number 49, right-handed reliever Joseph King. Ninth rounder in 2022, was hurt much of this year at Peoria, so we didn't see a lot of Joseph King. What do you think about Joseph as a prospect, Blake?
Joseph King is a really interesting prospect. He's a prospect I like quite a bit. If he was, if he'd thrown more than the 14 innings that he threw this year and ended up with, a more reasonable total of like 60, 70 innings for a guy coming out of the bullpen, there's a good chance I would have ranked him a lot higher in this list. What we see with Joe King is specifically a really good changeup. The rest of his stuff is kind of middling and some variation of below average to kind of fringe average to maybe slightly above. But the changeup is a true put away pitch for him. It's his go-to pitch. He simply struggles to get opposite-handed batters out or same-sided batters out because the changeup is often his pitch that he uses to neutralize the opposite-handed batters and really like even out that platoon split. So if he can just find a pitch that he can use to get same-handed hitters to swing and miss, he's going to be fine. I think there could be more changeup usage, could be more slider usage, but he's a reliever, pretty much a relief-only prospect probably with a really good changeup, really good control, and then potential to actually balance out the splits.
And we'll see if when King comes back next year, what kind of what kind of shape he's in. A guy that could easily go up our list, or if he can't deal with the injuries, might drift off into oblivion. This year in the draft in 2024, the Cardinals, of course, forfeited their second rounder, but in their for their fourth round and their sixth round pick, they picked two guys who were catchers, and I thought that was a very curious approach by the Cardinals, given that they have two young catchers with St. Louis, obviously, in Herrera and Pages, and then three catching prospects in Crooks Bernal and Sammy Hernandez. The second catcher that they took in the sixth round, Josh Cross. Now, Josh Cross came from the University of Cincinnati, and the Cardinals put him at first base. Does Josh Cross have enough bat to be a first baseman? He had an above-average year at Palm Beach, but batted just 216 in his first 100 or so plate appearances.
Yeah, I think there's a chance that he does, and a lot of it's going to depend on what his swing decisions look like. Because in college, he was a guy who ran above average contact rates with pretty solid power metrics across the board, and he just generally tended to swing at a lot of pitches outside the zone. He really dialed back on that in single A, whether it was a small sample size thing or whether it's because he's just a more advanced hitter with a better eye. For the level that he's playing at remains to be seen. So I'm curious to see what specifically happens to his walk rate as he starts to climb the ladder and get into the higher levels. But I think I graded his power a tick above his contact. That's about how I would expect it to play. And I think if he can really start to tap into some of that power consistently, which he didn't do in a small sample size, there is a chance that his bat is good enough for him to stick at first base.
Now, I should mention, we're talking about Josh Cross there at 48. I should mention that the way that we do our rankings each year, Blake and I independently rank 65 prospects. We put the two lists together, and what you see as the top 50 are the average of our two scores. However, we also in the individual articles show what Blake said about how Blake ranked the player versus I. And Joshua Baez, on one hand, just 21 years old, great power potential as an outfielder. On the other hand, 3 years in A-ball, got moved up to high A, didn't cut it, got pushed back to low A, and late in the year did well back in Palm Beach. But still, I'm a little impatient and tired of waiting for Joshua Baez to emerge. You think that still might happen?
I think it's still possible, and Joshua Baez is a player that I really want to believe in. He just hasn't shown enough progress in the time he's been in the system. He still has the same kind of outstanding tools that he's always had. He hits the ball tremendously hard. He will consistently have the hardest exit velocities of any player on his team in the organization, and regardless of what level he's at. I mean, he's topped 114 miles per hour before with the batted ball when he was like 19 years old or 20 years old in single A. So he's a guy who's super young, can hit the ball really hard, has a strong arm, he's fast, he's big. There's a lot of things to dream on. It's just he doesn't make consistent contact, and he's never shown really an improvement in his ability to do so. So I think the tools are what allow me to rank him on the back end of our rankings. But if he doesn't start to show a little bit more refinement with his hit tool specifically, he's probably going to fall off.
And that's Joshua Baez, 47. At 46, the first of a number of pitchers that the Cardinals drafted this year. And of course, the Cardinals typically don't have their pitchers who they draft play that year because of the long time frame between when their college season ends and the draft and when they report, and also the fact that they've already thrown a lot of innings. Now, the Cardinals, as I already talked about what they did with catchers, after later on in day 2 of the draft, in rounds 8 and 9, they picked up a couple of pitchers coming off Tommy John surgery. And Tommy John surgery is usually not a career ender for anyone, but it's an interesting approach by the Cardinals. The first one, Jack Finley, 22-year-old lefty from Notre Dame. What are you going to be looking for Jack Finley as he takes the field in 2025 for the first time as a pro?
I think it's going to be a number of things. And the first is just how does he look after pretty much a year off of pitching and then making the transition from college to pro ball? Can he throw strikes consistently? Is he going to be kind of tentative and nibble around the edges while he gets comfortable? Or is he really going to attack hitters? And then I think the second thing I want to see is how does his stuff transition from college to the pros? Because sometimes what we'll see is a pitcher's stuff will actually get a little bit worse when they actually switch to the professional baseball. You'll often see a college pitchers like induced vertical break on his fastball come down an inch or two. And it doesn't happen to every pitcher, but it's not uncommon to see that. So I'll be curious to see if his stuff can maintain where it was at, and if the Cardinals potentially are able to get more velocity out of his fastball, which currently sits in the low 90s.
Yeah. So number 45, free article that you can read at the Cardinal Nation about Drew Rom. And of course, he's a lefty who made 8 starts for St. Louis late in the 2023 season, missed all of 2024. The Cardinals took him off the 40-man. He cleared waivers, so Drew Rom will be pitching at Memphis this coming year and trying to find a way to get back onto the roster, as some guys in the past have, as most recently Packy Elkins. So it's not impossible. Okay, so 44, Jeremy Rivas, shortstop, got to go to the Arizona Fall League a year ago, played all year at shortstop for Springfield, but is really a singles hitter, good defensively, but a kind of a punch and Judy singles hitter. And interestingly enough, the Cardinals haven't had Jeremy Rivas play multiple defensive positions. And if he's a shortstop only guy, it seems like his path to playing time with St. Louis is blocked.
Yeah, it does. And it's actually really interesting to see how the Cardinals handle Jeremy Rivas, because when you have a guy put up a 66 WRC plus at high A, you think he's probably not good enough to go to double A, but that didn't stop the Cardinals from pushing him to the higher level. And he actually had his best offensive season in his career in double A. And admittedly, he was still a below average hitter, and it's almost entirely because he hits for no power. But he does,
also 21 years of age. So again, a young 21-year-old in double A, that's unusual.
Yeah, and the Cardinals seem to believe in him. They seem to believe in the glove specifically, that's his carrying tool. That's his best tool. He's a defensive player first and foremost. But if that bat can just come around, if he can just show a little bit more power, just keep that average up, do something to make him a usable hitter, that can help him get on the field due to the strength of his glove.
Right. So that was Jeremy Rivas at 44. At number 43, again, maybe a little prospect fatigue on my part with right-hander Edwin Nuñez. We've talked about Nuñez for a long time, had a $500,000 bonus coming out of the Dominican Republic, can throw 100 miles an hour, but really didn't have any idea where the ball was going to go a lot of the times. Really turned it around late in 2023 at Peoria, and it looked like coming into 2024, Edwin Nuñez had kind of got his ship back on course, but the Cardinals made what seemed like a reasonable decision at the time, and that was to put Edwin Nuñez back into the starting rotation at a higher level Double-A Springfield, and that frankly didn't work. They kept at it for 17 starts all the way into August, and then put Edwin Nuñez back in the Double-A bullpen. And of course, as a reliever, a player is going to have less value than as a starter, but maybe if Nuñez can harness his stuff, he might be better in short bursts as a reliever.
Yeah, and that's always been the question with Nuñez. And I think in the article itself, I actually wrote that I consider him as like the pitching version of Joshua Baez, and in the sense that he has stuff to dream on, loud tools, a hard fastball, a good slider. He just doesn't have the kind of refinement you would want to see from a pitcher who looks to be somebody who has the stuff to be a top prospect, but just falls short of that. So ideally, I don't think he's built for starting. It was fine, I think, for the Cardinals to try it, but I think when he goes back to the bullpen, we'll see if he can kind of find a little bit of momentum and maybe harness his stuff a little bit better because, as I said, he can miss bats. He's just going to have to throw the ball in the zone more consistently.
And his second year at Double A is probably coming up. And they often say, the Cardinals player development folks often say, Double A is a time in which they have to start to deliver results. You can't just talk about promise and hope. You're a couple of steps away from the majors. You've got to start to deliver. And Edwin Nuñez hasn't done that yet, but we'll see what happens. Number 42. Now, there's a number of young pitchers that spent the year at Palm Beach. Of course, Palm Beach had a tremendous season, steamrolled their way through the regular season, won both halves, won the Florida State League title. And big part of that was their rotation. And 19-year-old Leonel Sequeira was a part of that from Venezuela. And, came up to Palm Beach partway through the season, but did a real nice job, first of all, in the Florida Complex League.
Yeah, he did. And he's a really interesting pitcher. I was really excited to see him get the call to Palm Beach so we can actually start to get some of the metrics on his pitches and really start to dive into what his arsenal looks like. And he's a guy who's shown good command, good control. He's had good results at a young age at an advanced level. He checks a lot of boxes from that perspective. The stuff isn't exactly loud, but he throws a ton of pitches. I mean, I think there's a fastball, a sinker, a cutter, a slider, a curveball, and a changeup, and he'll use all of them and mix it up. So there's certainly a lot of potential weapons there in the arsenal. It's just a matter of can he refine them a little bit more and maybe add a few miles per hour velocity here or a little bit of extra movement there as he matures. So certainly an interesting guy to keep an eye on.
Yeah, that's Leonel Sequeira. So number 41, the Cardinals continued into day 3 of the draft, drafted a left-handed hitting outfielder from the University of Alabama, Ian Petrutz. And Petrutz is certainly a bat-first guy, but he probably exceeded everybody's expectations in his first 115 plate appearances in Palm Beach, a 915 OPS, which, by the way, was better than anybody in the Cardinals draft class, including first-rounder J.J. Weatherholtz. Should we get excited about Ian Petrutz yet, or is he, just a product of having been an advanced college bat in low A late in the season?
I think it remains to be seen, but I do think Ian Petrutz is a guy who had a really good profile coming out of college, and he probably fell because he's a little bit older and because he doesn't really have a great glove. He's a left field only kind of profile, maybe some first base if his back can handle it, but he hit at an exceptionally high level in both the Big Ten in college and then transferred to the SEC and demolish SEC pitching as well. He makes a ton of contact. He hits for good power. He does a lot of things you would want a really good offensive player to do. He is a little prone to hitting ground balls too often, which limits his actual power output a little bit. But as we saw in single A, the guy can just flat out hit. He'll draw walks. He hits everything he sees. So I'm very excited to see how he progresses. And I think, back to your earlier point about the Double A really being where you need to produce, that's what I'm going to be curious about because he's too advanced for single A pitchers. He's probably too advanced for high A pitchers. So I'll be very curious to see what he looks like when he comes up against guys in Double A and Triple A.
Number 40, Bryson Motts spent the year at Peoria and then also went down to the Arizona Fall League. You can read about that in a free article at the Cardinal Nation. Number 39 is sort of Edwin Nuñez at the next level up. And I'm talking about Andre Granillo, who didn't have a terrible 2024 with Memphis, but honestly, this time last year, I thought Granillo was going to force his way into the 40-man roster and, pitch with St. Louis last year. Now we're at the point where at 24 years old, he was left unprotected in the Rule 5 draft. He might be a guy that somebody takes a gamble on because you look at over 11 strikeouts per 9, but the walk rate pushing 6 per 9 is a concern. And for whatever reason, Andre Granillo hasn't been able to figure out the command that he needs to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. If he could throw more strikes, he'd probably be in a major league bullpen right now. But I think one of the interesting things about Granillo is obviously the lack of command is what it is. Hopefully that can improve. But the fastball actually isn't that great of a pitch. It's really the slider that's just his money pitch. And it's a really weird profile for a slider because it actually has riding life. It's got like 4 inches of riding life, whereas most sliders are hovering right around like the 0 mark or into the negative. So it's like kind of a weirdly profiled pitch. It gets a 40% whiff rate, and hitters just simply don't square it up very often. And I think that's great for him. It's a pitch that works really well, and it's also a pitch that demolishes right-handed hitters. When he comes up and matchups where he has the platoon advantage, he is lights out. And he gave up like a 407 OPS to right-handers on the year. So he is certainly usable if they can get him into the right matchups. Against lefties, he kind of falls apart, and that's another one of his weaknesses. If he wants to be a true major league caliber reliever who can maybe last more than a couple batters, he's going to have to learn how to get lefties out. But I think there is a guy right there you could see some usability for in specific matchups.
Yeah, that three batter minimum, you can't really hide a guy who can't
Yep.
pitch to lefties. And that again is something that he's got to work on. That's sort of what we thought about with Michael McGreevy as well. Had trouble versus left-handers, but McGreevy figured it out, and maybe Granillo can do the same.
Yeah, it'd certainly be great. I think he's really just going to have to improve his changeup, which he rarely throws, or add a cutter, do something that he can just lean on a little bit against lefties.
All right, so number 38, Yairo Padilla, a shortstop from the Dominican Summer League. And we've talked a lot about what do we do with these guys who we don't have any video, we don't have any data on, we just have others' reports. And the reason Yairo Padilla draws so much attention, or one of the reasons, is that Baseball America, who has seen him play, not only ranked him very highly, the top prospect in the Cardinals system in the Dominican Republic, but the number 2 prospect in the Dominican Summer League. And just as a reminder, Dominican Summer League has 51 teams, 1,500 players, and they called this 17-year-old switch hitter the number 2 prospect in the DSL. What do you think, Blake? I mean, we have him at 38, so obviously we want to see more from him.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think I buy into the hype enough to put him on the list. I don't buy it enough to put him into the top 30 until I just get the chance to actually evaluate him with my own eyes and actually see him put up some numbers against a level where we can kind of take those at face value a little bit more. But I think one of the interesting things about the Baseball America report on him was specifically the glowing reports about his glove. And if he's a guy who can actually play up the middle and stick up the middle, that certainly adds a lot of promise to his game because he's fast. He's shown a good hit tool. He can take walks. There's a little bit of pop in the bat. He hasn't struck out a lot. And he did all of that as a 17-year-old and a very young 17-year-old. Hasn't turned 18 for another 8 months. So he certainly checks a lot of boxes so far, only at the DSL level. Certainly want to see more, but he's definitely a guy who feels like he could be ascending.
And another DSL player who we did talk a lot about during the summer because he was our system-wide pitcher of the month in both June and July. And I'm talking about number 37 prospect, Kyverson Ramirez, who in his second year in the DSL, pretty much had that league in his hand and was moved up to the Florida Complex League at the end of the year. So we know Kyverson Ramirez will be pitching in the Florida Complex League at the age of 19 next year.
Yeah, and I'll be very curious to see if he can even get himself into single A a little bit because he did spend 2 full seasons more or less in the DSL. So I think that hurts his evaluation a little bit in my eyes. And admittedly, we're only looking at stats. We don't really have tools. We don't have video on these guys. So we still have to see what he can do. But he's shown really good command, limited home runs at a great rate. It looks like there's a little bit of strikeout potential there. He's hovering right around a 25% strikeout rate in the DSL. So again, another guy super young, but certainly intriguing.
All right, the last guy we're going to cover in our whirlwind group run through the top end of the top 50 is number 36 prospect Pete Hansen. Hansen is a guy that was selected in the 3rd round in 2022. Spent his first full year at Palm Beach, second year at Peoria. Started off slowly both years, but came on strong as he got up to the level of his league. What do we think the Cardinals are going to do with Pete Hansen as the pyramid narrows and there's more pressure on starting rotation spots?
I mean, I think he deserves probably a chance in the double A rotation. He's pitched well in single A, in high A, out of the rotation. He's a guy who, frankly, I don't believe in his stuff all that much. In fact, double A is right around the level where I would expect him to start struggling, especially with his fastball is just not that good. It got hit hard by single A hitters. He kind of covered it up in the numbers because his secondary stuff was so good. But typically, if you have single A hitters that are hitting the college pitcher's fastball pretty hard, it doesn't bode well for his future when he gets into double A and triple A. So I'll be curious to see if that happens for Hansen, if he can really adjust and start throwing the slider more and the curveball more and really like lean off of the fastball, kind of in the way that Sam Robersa did, because his slider is really good. And his slider, it's a pitch that gets righties out a lot, but he can even use it against lefties, which is pretty uncommon for sliders. And it's because he's so good at actually effectively locating it at the back foot of a left-handed hitter. And that makes it really hard for them to hit and allows them to get whiffs. He can do it to both sides of the plate. So I think there is the potential for him to overcome the bad fastball. And I think it's just going to be maybe a little bit more of a learning experience for him as he starts to get into double A and triple A and see some of these better hitters.
And you mentioned that you touched on the fact that Hansen would be a competitor for the double A rotation. It'll be interesting to see what happens in spring training will Tink Hence be healthy and step up to AAA? Where's Tekoa Roby in terms of his readiness? He's more likely to go back in AA. So, a lot's going to too depend on some of these incumbents and where they land as to whether new guys like Hansen get a chance to come up or not. And then, of course, the domino effect goes down where a Kyverson Ramirez is trying to get into the Palm Beach rotation, but maybe some of the new draft picks are going to start there as well. So it'll be interesting to watch these battles in spring training.
Yeah, certainly. And I think this is one where, you mentioned Tekoa Roby. He's probably going to be a guy who either, to be honest, gets hurt and then somebody else steps into the spot, or stays healthy and pitches really well in AA and gets promoted to AAA. So I think there's the opportunity for, even if a guy like Pete Hansen doesn't make it, to start the season, he could be one of the first guys to slide into a spot once it opens up.
Yeah, great point, Blake. And we've seen historically that by the second half of May, there's a series of moves that occur, and then another set of moves later on in July when the new draft picks are ready to come in. So there's a couple inflection points in the season where there's, potentially significant change. So we did a whirlwind through 50 through 36. This morning, we posted up about catcher Ryan Campos, who was the fourth rounder this year. And we talked about Josh Cross already. Of those two, Campos is obviously considered a better catching prospect because he's the guy that caught at Palm Beach while Cross played first base. So if you want to read about Ryan Campos, head over to the Cardinal Nation and read that free article. And if you're interested in reading more about all these players that Blake and I talked about today, please consider subscribing to Cardinal Nation. And, as you're heading into the holidays, think about a gift subscription for a Cardinal fan in your life. I'll be happy to help you get that set up. It's something that's very popular around this time of year. And if you want to discuss these prospects with other like-minded Cardinals fans or fans that you aren't like-minded with, stop over at the Cardinal Nation. We have a free forum that every day there's discussion about these prospects. And the message board community is also voting on their own top 50 right now. So you can get in on that voting action as well. Blake, I want to thank you for your work here and thank you for everything you do this year at the time of year, and wish everybody out there a happy Thanksgiving.
Absolutely.
And with that, we will close November 27th edition with Wednesday Walton and Newberry, and we'll see you all next Wednesday. Take care.